Hello, everyone, once again, and welcome to the Learn While Sleeping podcast. The format is having a little change right now. Normally, in the past, we've always done it where it's mostly oriented towards you sleeping as a listener. So we have the soft piano in the background and whatnot. And I started to realize over time that I think speaking a bit more naturally is a little better because, what if you want to listen while driving? What if you want to listen while doing your dishes? I find that often just a normal conversational tone is pretty good for falling asleep. And I think it's better because you can talk about a lot more interesting topics. There's a much bigger range on what I can talk about. And, some things that, I thought, oh, it's too interesting for you to listen to while falling asleep. But now I change my mind. I'm like, you guys should listen to things that are more interesting, I think. Anyway, so that being said, today's episode is actually about time travel. And you're probably thinking, like, how can time travel be possible? Like, why this is a science-based, science-driven podcast. Why would I try to choose time travel as a topic? It's not science fiction. But I do think there are some empirical ways of looking at this, and I think you might find it kind of interesting. We're going to talk about time travel, and we're going to talk about a specific party that Stephen Hawking invited people to, and why that party has everything to do with proving time travel wrong or right. Okay? It's kind of like the time travel party. But before we get into that, we're going to just do a quick segment where we're going to just go over the latest in biotech news today and this past week. Okay? So, first of all, strm.bio, which is a biotech company, they get major U.S. funding to develop in-body CAR T therapy. Okay, so what basically happens, it says that strm.bio received up to $8.4 million from ARPAH, which is a U.S. Health Innovation Agency, to develop a new way of delivering gene therapy directly inside the body, using tiny natural particles called megakaryocytes-derived vesicles. Okay, now, just to explain what that means, right now, CAR T cancer treatment is a type of cancer treatment that requires taking your blood out, changing your immune cells in a lab, and then putting them back in. Now, this new approach tries to let the body do that by editing itself without having to remove any cells. Kind of like installing a new software update. When you have a Tesla, it remotely installs new updates. There was a time when you had to take your computer or whatever, your device into stores and, but you don't do that anymore. So this is kind of like an update directly into your immune system. Pretty big deal. If this works, cancer treatments could become cheaper, faster, and safer. Okay. Other in the news, Spatial Touchstone released a standard rulebook for spatial transcriptomics. So, researchers created a huge reference dataset and set of rules so scientists analyzing genes in tissues can all use the same standards and get consistent results. So, imagine everyone is trying to read a super complicated map, okay? So, you have a very complex map, and now everyone's using different symbols and colors. So, this project, it basically makes one official and universal map key, so all labs can understand each other's data. This is going to make research more reliable, especially studies on cancer, the brain, and immune cells. Not like a major breakthrough like that, but still very cool. Okay, and then this is a new one. So it says that there is a new mutational hotspot found at gene starting points. So recently, scientists discovered that mutations often happen at the start or beginning of genes, more than previously known, which helps explain certain genetic diseases. So we always know that mutations usually occur between base pairs in a genetic transcript, right? So let's say you have your adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine A, C, G, T, right? And a mutation, sometimes something will shift. So Then when you transcribe it into an amino acid, it changes the amino acid completely, or it will just ruin the whole code, and that same gene can't get expressed properly, right? What we didn't know up until this point is that the position of where mutations will often happen the most. So this is actually a huge breakthrough for biology. You think of genes like sentences in a book. So researchers are now discovering that there's a spot right at the beginning of many sentences where typos happen way more than expected. So this is going to help us understand genetic disorders much more, and also help us improve diagnosis on genetic disorders. Okay, and a new study has now found that the early Earth's atmosphere may have naturally created building blocks of life. Okay, so the new study suggests that Earth's ancient atmosphere, which was mostly full of sulfur, unlike today, could make important pre-life molecules like amino acids on its own. So imagine Earth billions of years ago as like a giant chemical kitchen. So it turns out that the sky itself may have been cooking the ingredients needed for life. Okay. And finally, just a few small ones. So I think this is pretty interesting. So MIT developed a non-invasive glucose monitoring. So good news for people with diabetes or people who need to monitor their glucose. Like I've seen people growing up, you always have to prick your finger. This is something that I feel like should have been updated a long time ago, but I mean, better late than never. So MIT created a Raman spectroscopy device that measures blood sugar through the skin using harmless laser light. So this is just a high level of engineering. So basically, instead of poking through your finger and bleeding, this small machine is going to just shine a light on your skin and then read your blood sugar remotely, sort of like a scanner. And this is a huge improvement for people with diabetes. So no more needles, no more bleeding. You can just like monitor your glucose like at any moment, really. That might even help with monitoring and keeping your blood sugar levels up to date much easier, I think. Another thing, so Monod Bio and Gator Bio will now partner to make the next gen biosensors. These are two companies, so they're building super sensitive biological smoke detectors that can detect diseases or proteins faster and more accurately. Okay, and then King's College launches a new master's program in biotech and computational biology. So there's a top university which just opened a new program that mixes biology with coding. Exactly the kind of training that the biotech industry actually needs right now. So all future students and future undergrads, you might want to find this interesting. This is something I've thought about for years since I first started my studies in biology. There was a time, I would say, coding in biology kind of exploded from the early to mid 2010s. And it was there in the early 2000s, but not at this scale, really. And most people who studied biology up until now, like, your observations have always been kind of just, you write and describe them. They're more written. But now with coding, because we have the Human Genome Project and how much genomics are involved with computation now, it's I think essential and almost imperative that biology undergraduate programs should be comprised of a large amount of programming knowledge. And in the future, I actually see that being what happens. I think most people who study biology are going to know how to program, because that's just where biology work is headed now. It's just that's the most accurate way to study biology. Okay. Anyway, so these were all what I thought were the most cool and interesting updates in biology, okay? So now we're going to talk about our main topic of today's episode, which is, of course, time travel. So, is time travel possible? This is a question that I'm pretty sure everyone has kind of just pontificated on at some point. I'm sure you probably were in the shower one day and thought, what if I could just go back to my 10th birthday or something? Everyone has considered this. It's not as far off as an idea as you would think it is, because you see it in movies and whatever, and there's no real, like, you don't see scientists really investigating it publicly like that. But when you really think about it, in essence, time is somewhat of a dimension, right? We don't actually have enough knowledge on time, how it actually exists, just that it somehow works, right? So this question, you weren't the only one who wondered about it. Stephen Hawking was actually very curious about this as well. And so in 2009, Stephen Hawking decided to hold a party. This party is probably, I would say, one of the most compelling arguments or evidences towards why time travel is likely not possible or won't be possible just in the coming century or so, at least. So he did something pretty interesting. So you walk into a gymnasium and you see Stephen Hawking sitting there by himself with a bunch of drinks and snacks and everything. And imagine you just walk in and you just see that, and he's just sitting there. Okay? The reason why, well, he did it deliberately. So he's sitting there with champagne decorations. And the weird thing about this party is, well, he didn't invite anyone. There were no invitations set out at all. Why? So his thinking was, he decided to send out all the invitations only after the party already happened. So after the party happened, he announced that he's having a party and it's going to be at that time and whatever. And he made it very public. The reasoning being that the only people who are possible to attend that party would have to know the exact coordinates and location, which wasn't his home, and they'd have to know the exact time. Only people from the future were capable of doing this. So, if time travel to the past was possible, time travelers from the future would be able to see this post and see his later invitation and just come back and attend. So obviously no one came. I mean, it would have been pretty crazy, like, if, imagine he was sitting there and then you did, like, maybe it would have been funny if you just saw, like, a janitor walk in or something, and, you know, he probably would have jumped out of his chair. I mean, maybe not jumped out, but he probably would have been astonished for a second, thinking that maybe time traveling is possible. But no, unfortunately, nothing that exciting happened. So, this is not, like, strict proof, because, like, we have to account for error. Like, what if, you know, there's a lot of people right now who don't even know about this whole experiment. I didn't know about it until recently. So who's to say that in a century people will know? And who's to say that maybe within the next couple decades, or the time when people actually can time travel, that they would have remembered to attend his party? So it's not strict proof, but I would say it's a pretty compelling argument that it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. So now let's get to, like, the arguments on why time travel could be possible, why it is something that you could actually consider scientifically. So let's talk about relativity. You know, Einstein said that time and space are relative. Okay? So general relativity allows closed time-like curves, otherwise known as CTCs. What on God's earth is a closed time-like curve? Well, Einstein's equations allow space-time to bend and loop back on itself. This is something new that I didn't even think about. I've never heard about it before. I remember taking in physics and studying relativity and everything, and I knew that time bends and time and space bends, but I didn't realize that it loops back on itself like that. So these loops, they're called closed time-like curves, and mathematically, they do permit time travel. So there's some credible models with CTCs, like Gödel's rotating universe, the Tipler cylinder, transversable wormholes by Kip Thorne, and cosmic strings, like the GOT model. So basically what these things mean is you can think of space-time as a flexible sheet. So if you have a flexible sheet in front of you, and then you fold it so that point A and point B touch now. Okay? Moving between them could basically place you in the past, if that makes sense. But the thing is, physics does not forbid this mathematically. So we're not saying, this argument is not saying that, time travel can absolutely happen. What it's saying is, this is not a far off thing to suggest, based on our understanding of closed time-like curves. Okay. The other conceptual argument is about wormholes. You've probably heard about wormholes used in the same discussion as time travel many times in science fiction. So a wormhole is basically a shortcut between two regions of space-time. If you accelerate one end, basically time dilation from relativity is when you accelerate, and then there are two openings which age differently, creating a time offset. Okay, so you could enter the younger end and come out of it the older end, effectively traveling into the past. The problem with this is it requires exotic matter with negative energy density. The Casimir effect suggests it's possible. Also, the other problem is wormholes may collapse faster than we could use them. Still, this is the most scientifically accepted theoretical time machine. And I mean, my memory may be serving me wrong, but I believe something like this was used in Interstellar. I have to rewatch that movie, but yeah, I think that was a similar principle. I think it was either that or a black hole. The next theory is actually regarding black holes. So when you go near a black hole, what happens generally is time slows dramatically, which is due to something called gravitational time dilation, right? So you're like, for example, if you're 1 hour near the edge of a black hole, it's like being 7 years far away. Also, this actually was the science used in Interstellar, actually. So this is a real and experimentally confirmed thing. So because GPS satellites, you can even correct for this effect. But the thing to note is that this only allows travel to the future, not backwards. Which, to be honest, like, that's kind of boring. That is basically what we do on a daily basis. We do travel in the future. The other idea is quantum mechanics, which allows backward influence in some interpretations. So there are examples. So, for example, retrocausality. This is something where there's some quantum models allow signals that go backwards in time, though not in a way that humans could use. But like, it is possible to send those signals. Then there's quantum entanglement. While it doesn't allow communication backwards, there are measurement correlations which appear instantaneous in indifferent time direction. And then there's something called the many worlds interpretation by Hugh Everett. So if time travel occurs, you don't just enter your past, you enter a parallel branch, meaning you could go to a past but not your own past. This can solve some paradoxes, but to be honest, I feel like it opens up a lot of more complications personally. Now, let's get into some of the main arguments that basically compel you to think that time travel may not be possible. The first one is the chronology protection conjecture, which is created by Stephen Hawking himself. Again, I don't like to think of him in this case as some cranky old guy who just doesn't want to believe in time travel, but clearly he had the curiosity for it. Stephen Hawking basically proposed that the laws of physics prevent time loops in order to protect causality. So what does this mean? He argued that quantum fluctuations near a time machine would explode to infinite energy. This would destroy the wormhole or whatever structure you're using. Therefore, nature actually protects history. This matches the outcome of his time traveler party, actually. There's another idea, and this one's very interesting, actually. It's the idea that there were no observed time travelers. Can you think about it? Like, okay, what if time travel is possible? Forget about just Stephen Hawking's party. Why were there no observed time travelers in history whatsoever? And of course, yes, there could be just some people walking among us secretly. Maybe someone walking in a cloak who is a time traveler, maybe your neighbor, and they've never told you. Sure. But really, after all these centuries, no one has ever noticed one person. If time travel to the past were easy or common, We should see, at some point, we should have been able to see tourists or historians or archaeologists from the year 3000. Time travel selfies at key events. But I just feel like the idea of not seeing one, not even a single one, it doesn't necessarily disprove time travel, but it does suggest that it could be impossible. Or it's heavily regulated or gated. Or time travel only works from the moment the machine is created. Like the temporal access window theory. Right? So there's no way to 100% know this, but that's one way of thinking. Another idea is that energy requirements themselves are catastrophic. So let's think about how we would engineer a time machine. Creating a time machine might require really more energy than all the stars in the galaxy. It might require negative mass or negative energy. It might require cosmic strings, which may not even exist necessarily, and also may require wormholes stabilized against their own collapse. I mean, why does it require all these things? I mean, because these are the only things that we can actually observe that are capable of traveling in time. So essentially, we don't have the energy budget for time travel at the moment. The other compelling argument is that quantum unitarity appears to forbid past interference. So what this means is if you could go back and change the past, what you violate is unitarity, conservation of information, and probability structure of quantum mechanics. Unless you enter a different timeline, which is the many worlds interpretation. That actually basically attempts to solve this. But assuming you don't, this is a big obstacle, I think. So where this leaves us is, we have some ideas of whether time travel could be possible, and we just have some that don't. What we can say right now is that time travel to the future, 100% possible. This is real and proven because gravitational time dilation works with black holes approaching a black hole, remember? Speed-based time dilation in regards to wormholes. And this thing happens to GPS satellites and astronauts all the time, actually. It's been documented. Time travel to the past, theoretically it is allowed, but probably not physically possible. The math does allow it. The physics, however, seem to forbid it. And Hawking, poor Stephen Hawking, had no people come to his party. When it comes to time traveling to alternative timelines, this is actually possible in theory. Only just because if we chart the many worlds theory, it does solve a lot of paradox and doesn't necessarily break the physics. Time traveling to your own past, this is the thing that's most likely probably impossible. Because of the chronology protection by Stephen Hawking, and because we observe zero time travelers, because time machines, they probably self-destruct before use. There's probably no way that you're going to be able to time travel to your own past. Although it would be very exciting and it probably would change a lot of our lives. Let's talk about a pretty interesting topic regarding this. Let's talk about paradoxes. This is pretty interesting and somewhat funny at some levels. There is one paradox which is called the grandfather paradox. Okay? So a lot of scientists have theorized about this, and remember the concept of time travel. It can be explored in Einstein's special theory of relativity because time's flow it does depend on how fast you're moving. The quicker you travel, the slower that seconds will pass. This is known as time dilation. But going backwards in time is the part that's much more complicated. Some scientists propose that it could be possible through the use of a wormhole or a tunnel in space-time from one point in the cosmos to another. But if one end of the wormhole is accelerated to near the speed of light and then sent back to where it came from, the two sides would no longer be synced. So one would be in the past and then one would be in the future. Walking between them would theoretically allow for time travel. But the problem is there are some significant challenges and paradoxes which are associated with this. So when we get to the grandfather paradox, it suggests that if a person were to travel back in time, or let me try and explain this better. So basically, if a person goes and tries to kill their own grandpa, what happens is they prevent their own existence. So if you travel back in time, you kill your grandfather, well, how were you born? Right? So to resolve such paradoxes, some scientists will then propose the concept of a multiverse. And that's why, you've seen this in every Marvel movie now since, No Way Home. The whole reason why is because it does a multiverse is just a theory that resolves a lot of potential conflicts with time travel. That's basically it. Otherwise, it doesn't really need to exist. It's basically just saying that, okay, like every new decision that we make is going to create a new divergent timeline so that we aren't going to interfere with each other in the past. And the other idea, there's one conundrum, which is how can you be in two places at once? So for being in two places at once, quantum physics has demonstrated that tiny particles can exist actually in multiple places at once, a phenomenon which is known as quantum superposition. However, this has historically been thought to apply only to tiny subatomic particles. The possibility of larger visible objects or even humans existing in multiple places at once is still a topic of ongoing research. And it sounds crazy and impossible, but it is worth researching because, when it comes to science, never say never. A lot of things we thought were wild and impossible are now basically everyday things now. So another paradox is something known as the bootstrap paradox. So it's kind of funny, but so let's say I go back in time and I bring with me a copy of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone to J.K. Rowling. And this is before she ever came up with the idea of writing it or whatever. And I hand her this book and I say, oh my God, this is going to be so successful. This book is going to make you millions. It's going to become a movie franchise and a theme park and everything. And you're going to be known as one of the greatest authors to ever walk the earth. You have to publish it. Okay? And let's say she listens to me and she says, okay, she takes the book, publishes it. It becomes super successful. It gets made into a movie with Daniel Radcliffe and, a super successful franchise. And then now it's getting an HBO show and all that happens. Okay? Now, what this means now is that she didn't actually write the book. We now have a world where Harry Potter is still the successful franchise it is, but J.K. Rowling never wrote it. She just copied it and published it. Okay? But if she just copied it and published it, and then I gave her the book, and I copied it and helped her publish it, then who wrote the book? No one. This is a pretty funny paradox, but it's just, there's not really much of an answer to it. The book just appears. It's basically in this scenario just appearing into the world with no one having written it. It is pretty strange. And this is why there is a big proportion of time travel that is highly hypothetical, and it starts to go down this rabbit hole, or I guess wormhole, if you will, that is a lot more philosophical than scientific. That's why I got the science out of the way first, right? The other thing is another thing to consider, just for, I guess, just for the semantics' sake. When we talk about time travel, you need to consider how we ask this question, because technically speaking, time travel is possible, 100% possible, and it's proven because we are time traveling. Every single one of us are time travelers right now. We're time traveling just in the future. Time is moving. So it's not that we aren't time traveling, but most people are thinking about traveling back in time, which is a completely different thing. So like, theoretically, if we travel forwards, we can't go back. So we can only change what happens in the future and not what happened in the past. if we change what happened in the past, the present would also change. And then the future would be completely different from what it is today. So, like, if you ever wanted to go forward in time even more than we are right now, you have to go really humanely fast. Um, Now, there's another theory that actually attempts to resolve a lot of problems that we had earlier, which is like, Stephen Hawking's party, which is major letdown. You would think that would be one of the greatest ideas ever to invite time travelers to visit. So there is one possible theory as to why maybe those guys never showed up. And maybe it doesn't mean that time travel doesn't work at all. And it probably could be possible. And that theory is the idea that maybe the functionality of how time traveling works is that you can only time travel to the moment where the first machine was activated or created. Like, so basically it's like, if time travel is possible, this would be another explanation as to why you haven't seen any other time tourists anywhere at any point in time. It's because you can't travel to a time before time travel becomes possible. So, for example, if backwards time travel becomes possible in the year 2300, anyone in the future can time travel as far back as 2300, but not any earlier than that because time travel didn't exist then. So this could be a possible explanation as to the idea that maybe time travel will work in the future, but we just won't have any visitors right now. And you can kind of think of this theory like the invention of the telephone. People years or even centuries before the telephone was first invented would never been able to conceptualize the idea of speaking long distance or communicating in real time with a person very far away. They might have had this kind of theory themselves, like, will this ever be possible to talk to my friend miles away and hear his voice and we talk to each other in real time? And people might argue that, oh, well, why hasn't someone already contacted me and started talking to me? And the reason is because you need a telephone device first, right? So with a telephone, you need the first phone call to work only once the first telephone is activated, and you can't receive a time traveler until you have the appropriate equipment as well. So, and that's the other thing. Some people argue also that technically time travel can't, quote unquote, get invented in the future, because you're not inventing time travel. It either exists or it doesn't. And if it existed, someone could have already traveled backwards to now or before from a future date. But who knows? Let's talk about some alternative theories regarding time travel. Maybe it may not be possible to travel back in time strictly, but some people do theorize that although we can't travel ourselves in time, we may in the future be able to view the past. Light, it takes certain time to travel distances, right? Some people are theorizing that based on that, it might be possible to view the past through this method by traveling to certain distances from Earth or wherever you want to look back into the past by having very powerful telescopes or recording devices. It's not so far-fetched if you think about it, because if you use a telescope right now and you look at stars that are very, 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 very distant outside of our galaxy, what you're looking at right now are not stars in their real position. They're long gone from where they were because of the speed of light. So that's one theory. Some people also say that maybe we will evolve past the need to travel in physical vehicles and such, as time travelers will travel to their old selves and everyone will be none the wiser. That's one solution to the where are they theory. So time travelers will basically go back to their old selves, and people just won't want to progress anymore. Another idea is a little bit silly, but interesting and funny nonetheless. But one theory is that time travel might actually explain ghost stories. As timelines are disrupted and diverge, some of those people who were once alive in one and then dead in another could be seen. Doesn't make any sense, really. Should not be taken with any seriousness and definitely a grain of salt, but just interesting to hear. Another thing, which is again just interesting to hear, but not really. I wouldn't take it seriously like that. Is well, some people do theorize that there are people or individuals in history or from the past who might have actually fit the description of a time traveler. They tend to make references to future events a lot. They're dressed in strange attire or have no records of their birth or sometimes disappear without a trace. And these kind of stories are interesting to look at and read, and you can find a lot of them on Reddit and stuff. But of course, they are mostly non-falsifiable, so it's better to just treat them as interesting stories to just think about, or just feel like it's real. But I would say ultimately, in reality, as far as we've discussed so far, time travel likely is not possible right now, and maybe it could be possible in the future. As simple as that. Oftentimes with science, the true answer to these sci-fi questions is basically that simple. So still a very interesting thing to talk about. So with all that being said, this will basically conclude our episode on time travel. And before I go and I let you go, I'm just going to give you some resources on what you can probably look at to explore this topic a lot better on your own. When we're looking at reads, the first one, which is most important, is probably A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. An amazing book, and it's the best intro to space-time, black holes, and why Hawking is believed to have thought that time travel to the past is unlikely. Secondly, Black Holes and Time Warps by Kip Thorne. He's the physicist that was actually behind Interstellar. It covers wormholes, relativity, how time machines might theoretically work, and actual equations, but still readable. Even if you skip the math, the book is good. And then The Fabric of the Cosmos by Brian Greene. There are chapters on time as a dimension, why time has direction, whether backwards time travel breaks physics or not, and quantum mechanics and time. And it's very beginner friendly. And then finally, Time Travel in Einstein's Universe by J. Richard Gott. This is the only mainstream science book entirely about closed time-like curves, cosmic strings, and how civilization could build a time machine. Gott is a Princeton cosmologist, so this is a very high-quality book I recommend. When it comes to documentaries and science series, if you're not much of a reader, the first one is Into the Universe with Stephen Hawking, the time travel episode. This probably is the single best documentary ever made on real-time travel physics. He explains relativity, wormholes, paradoxes, and his time traveler party. The second one is The Fabric of the Cosmos by Brian Greene on PBS, and the episode called The Illusion of Time. It discusses how your future already exists in space-time, and why time might not actually flow. And then the final one is Through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman, and it's the time travel episode. More philosophical, but it covers quantum retrocausality, time symmetry in physics, and teleportation, which is something we didn't touch too much today. And then finally, Nova, the Elegant Universe, especially the parts on space-time geometry. This is an amazing documentary for beginners that goes on the science behind time travel. Finally, if you don't want to watch direct science or read science books, some great sci-fi, which is fun to read and happens to get most of the science right, is Interstellar, which of course was consulted by Kip Thorne. And then finally Primer, which is pretty accurate about closed time loops and causality contamination. This is a movie from 2004. Then Arrival, the movie which is not about time machines, but about nonlinear time perception. And then 12 Monkeys. Kind of random, I know, but this movie deals with fixed timelines and no free will causality loops, a model which many physicists now accept. And then finally, Predestination, a movie which is a perfect representation of the bootstrap paradox we discussed earlier. You know, the thing about offering the book to J.K. Rowling and she never wrote it. And then there's some sci-fi, which is not as realistic, but it's cool to watch and pretty fun, which is Back to the Future, Looper, Edge of Tomorrow. There's a scene about time travel in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. That's pretty good as well. And some of the best YouTube channels you can look at are, of course, Kazorkiskat, in a nutshell, Veritasium, and PBS Spacetime. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and hope you have a good rest or a good journey to wherever you're driving. And we're going to have a pretty interesting topic next time. Good day and good night.